We continue now at the top of Daf Chaf Beis Amud Aleph Meseches Shevuos. This is Shevuos Daf 22a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing Rabbi Akiva's opinion that when it comes to Shevuot, any amount that the person eats, let's say the person takes a Shevuot not to eat, and he eats even a kol shehu, so the person is going to be liable in such a situation. And the Chachamim of the Mishnah, they ask on Rabbi Akiva, where do we ever find that a person is liable for a kol shehu? There's always a minimum shir, generally a kezayis. And so the Gemara was asking a series of questions where we do seem to find that there is no minimum shir, and the Gemara just asked from Afar. Let's say a person takes a Shevuot not to eat Afar, so over there also it doesn't seem that there's a minimum shir. So again, what do the Rabbanan mean? What do the Chachamim mean when they say that we never find that there is no minimum shir? By Afar there is no minimum shir. And the Gemara continues, so Tifsho, but maybe we should answer the boy Rava, maybe we should answer the question of Rava. Rashi explains, Tifsho midaktani masnisen heichon matzinu. From the fact that in the Mishnah the Chachamim say, where do we find such a case? Alma ba'afar nami b'chazayis b'in. And maybe we see from there that by offer also there is a minimum shir of a kazayis. That's what it means. Tifsho to boy Rava. Maybe we should answer the question that Rava asked. Rava asked as follows: Shvuah shelo ochel v'ochal offer bekama. Let's say a person takes a shvuah not to eat. It's talking about not to eat offer. The Bach puts in the word offer over there, and then the person eats the offer. So Rava asked, how much is there a minimum shir? So Tifsho ad ika kazayis. We should answer the question by saying that you have to have a kazayis, because again, the Chacham said, where do we find a situation where you don't need a kezayis? And the Gemara says, Kiko Amrina, no, when were the Chachamim saying this? B'midi debar achila. That's only something that's edible. Ko Amrina, and that's where they were saying we don't find such a thing. And so therefore, again, that's not going to be a question from off or from dirt. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'harei konamos, but what about konamos? There also we find a kol shehu. Rashi explains, V'harei konamos, so omer konem kikor zu olai. Let's say the person says, konem, this particular loaf upon me. The halacha is oser atzon v'chol shehu. He's forbidding himself to have even the smallest amount of that loaf. V'chol shehu shaba, even any amount that's within it. Kidal kamon, as we're going to say later on. So that's an example where we find the kol shehu. And the Gemara says to that, konamos nami kimefarish dami. Konamos also is really considered like stating explicitly that you're not going to have a kol shehu. And Rashi says, "Kamefarish dami lefi she'eno mazkir bo shem achila kol shehu kamer," because there he's not even mentioning the eating. There he's saying that the kikor is konem to him, and by saying that automatically, it's as if you've explicitly stated, that you're forbidding even a kol shehu, even the smallest amount, to yourself. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Amar Lahen, Rabbi Akiva said to them, he said to the Chachamim, Heichon matzinu b'medaber umevi korban. He was responding to the Chachamim because the Chachamim say, where do we ever find that a person is liable for a kol shehu? So Rabbi Akiva says, where do we ever find that someone speaks and he has to bring a korban? Shezeh medaber umevi korban. Here in this situation, again by Shevuot, it's a situation where a person speaks and has to bring a korban. So you see, essentially, that this is an exceptional situation. And the Gemara says, Velo, but do we really not find someone speaking and having to bring a korban? Megadif, but what about the blasphemer? Medaber v'oser kwamin. The Gemara answers to that. We're talking, Rabbi Akiva is talking about someone who speaks and creates a prohibition. V'hai medaber v'chotehu. And over here by Megadif, it's a person who is sinning through his speech. Rashi explains, V'harei megadef mevorech es Hashem. That's talking about blessing the name of Hashem. That's a euphemism. It really means to curse. The polig Rabbi Akiva ad Rabbanan bechrisus. Rabbi Akiva argues on the Rabbanan and Krisus. V'yamar megadef mevi korban. He says that a megadef does in fact bring a korban. And again, the Gemara answers that when it comes to megadef, that's medaber v'chote. And the Gemara says, V'harei nazir. But what about a nazir? Mevi karbano al diburo kamrin. And the Gemara answers, no, we're talking about bringing the korban on the speech itself. V'hai mevi korban leishtaruye lechamrahu dekamaisi. But the nazir, he's actually bringing the korban in order to permit for himself the wine. And Rashi explains, V'harei nazir shemedaber v'oser b'diburo. He speaks and creates a prohibition. Umevi korban b'yom teglachto. And then he brings a korban on the day that he shaves. And Rashi continues, the Gemara said, we're talking al diburo, we're talking on his speech he has to bring the korban, meaning shehechlif diburo, that he switched, he deviated, he violated what he said that he would do, he violated the oath. But again, when it comes to a nazir, that's not what's happening. The nazirs bring the korban in order that he should be able to drink wine. And the Gemara continues, V'harei hektish, but what about a situation of hektish? Rashi explains, V'harei hektish medaber v'oser b'diburo es shehu maktish. He's speaking, he creates a prohibition on the item that he's consecrating. V'mhechlef diburo v'nene mimenu, and let's say he deviates from his words and he gets benefit from it, maybe korban me'ila, so he has to bring a korban me'ila, so that would be an example. And the Gemara says, no, that's not a good example either. Oser liatzmo kamrin, and we're talking about where he forbids the item to himself. V'hai oser al kol ha'olam kulahu, and in this case, he's forbidding it to everyone. And the Gemara continues and asks, Hare konamos, but again, what about konamos, where a person says konem of, let's say, a particular loaf of bread upon himself? Rashi says, Vare konamos, shalo asra olav, shalo asra ela olav. There it's only asra to him. V'machal mimenu, and if he does eat from what he wasn't supposed to eat from, kasalka daitach demevi carbon meila. Right now, the Gemara thinks you would bring a carbon meila. Shah konem lashon hektishu, because the word konem is like a language of hektish, so we put it in the same category of hektish. And the Gemara answers to that, kasavar, he holds ein meila b'konamos. By konamos there is no meila, so you would not bring such a carbon. Rashi explains ein meila b'konamos delo karinan be mikadshei Hashem. We don't call it mikadshei Hashem sharei chulin hu eitz l'kol, because this is not something that's consecrated to everybody. It's chulin in terms of everybody else. It's just konem to that particular individual. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Machlokas bestam, the whole machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan is again where the person didn't explicitly take the shvua on a kol shehu. Avol b'mefarish, but if he explicitly stated that he wasn't even going to eat a kol shehu, divrei hakol b'kol shehu, then everybody agrees that even by a kol shehu that would be a violation. My time, and what's the reason? Mefarish nami kibir yodami, because once he states it explicitly, that's like a whole creature, like we say that an ant, even if it's less than a kazayas, it's going to be forbidden, and the same would be true over here. V'yamar Rava says, Machlokas b'shalo ochel. The machlokas is when the way that the person phrases it is that he says he's not going to eat. Aval b'shalo etom, but if he says I'm not going to taste, so divrei hakol b'chol shu. Again, everybody agrees the violation would be at any amount. And the Gemara says, Pshita, isn't that obvious? The Gemara says, no, ma'od detema, what might you have said? Litom nami kida amri inchi. The word litom also, it's like people use that word. Maybe it means the same thing as ochel, the same thing as eating. Kamash malan, so we're coming to teach that no, etom is considered to be a kol shehu. That even a kol shehu is a violation. And the Gemara continues, Amar Papa says, Machlokas b'Shevuos, the whole Machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim is by Shevuos. Avol b'konamos, but again, if the way the person phrases it is konem kikar ze'olai, that this kikar is konem to me, if he phrases it in that fashion, divrei hakol v'chol shu. Again, everybody agrees the violation is even by a kol shu. My time, what's the reason? Konamos nami, when it comes to konamos as well, kevan delo kamidkar shema di achila, since he's not mentioning the word achila, the word eating, kidim efarish dami, it's like specifying even a kol shu, so it applies even to a kol shehu. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa. Shnei konamos mitzdarf, and the Brisa says that two konamos, they join together. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Shtei Shevuos ein mitzdarfos. When it comes to Shevuos, two Shevuos do not join together. Rabbi Meir says, konamos kishvuos, that konamos are just like Shevuos. And Rashi explains, Shnei konamos means shtei kikaros she'asran olav bekonim. Let's say he made konim on two loaves, so they are mitzdarfin, they join together, meaning let's say ma'at mizeh u'ma'at mizeh lekazayis. Let's say he eats a little bit from this one and a little bit from that one, and it adds up to a kazayis, so then he's in violation. Already you see that it seems not like Rav Papa. Rav Papa said that when it comes to konamos, it's a kol shu. So what are we even talking about kazayis over here for? And again, the Brisa then continued, shtei Shevuos, if you have shtei kikaros shenishba alei, and let's say there were two loaves which he took Shavuos upon, so ein mitzdarfos, so those they do not combine. Well, come on mefarish time, and the Gemara as it goes on will explain the reason. Now right now the Gemara thinks lefisha hizkir shem achila alzu v'shem achila alzu, since he mentioned the word achila on this particular loaf and achila on that particular loaf, so we think that they're not able to combine. And the Gemara continues and asks its question, now if it should enter your mind, like Rav Papa says, again Rav Papa said that by konamos it's a kol shu, so lamali l'tzarif, so this whole brisa doesn't make sense. Why are we joining anything together? The person is in violation by konamos anyhow, with even eating the smallest amount. And so the Gemara answers, Do Amar Achila Mizu Alai Konem, Achila Mizu Alai Konem. Well, the case is that actually in this particular brisa, he doesn't simply say Konem Kikar Ze Alai, that this Kikar is Konem. He actually uses the word Achila. So he says Achila Mizu Alai Konem, Achila Mizu Alai Konem. And so that's why once he's already saying the word Achila, you need a Kazai, so you need to start discussing whether it's mitzdarif or not. But the Gemara continues, if so, if the case over here is he's using the word achila, so then amai mitzdarfos. So then why is it that they're joining together? Because again, what's the brisa saying? It's saying shnei konamos are mitzdarfin, and really you're using the same language as a shvua. And so the Gemara says, so at the end, zil lahachalek shiur, you look at this loaf, you didn't have the right shear. V'zil lahachalek shiur, you look at this one, you didn't have the right shear. Why are they able to combine if you are using the word achila? And so the Gemara answers to that, the Amar Achila Mishteyan Alai Konim. Well, the reason they combine is because the way he phrases it is he says Achila Mishteyan. He puts it all, one Achila on both of them, and so therefore you're able to combine, again, from the two loaves, that it should add up to a kazayis. But the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Techavas Agabe Shevuos. Well, let's have the same case by Shevuos. The Amar Shavua Shalo Ochel Mishteyan. If the way he phrases it is a Shavua that he's not going to eat from both of them, so then Amayin Mitzdarfin. Why shouldn't they be Mitzdarif? But again, the whole point of the Tanakam of the Brisa is to make a distinction and say that Konamos are Mitzdarif and Shavuos are not, and so we still cannot understand the Brisa. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar of Pinchas, or Pinchas says, Shani Shavuos. It's different by Shavuos, even when it's phrased in that fashion. They cannot join together, they cannot combine. Mitoch shechalukos lechatos ein mitzdarfos. Because they're divided up when it comes to the carbon chatos, so also they're not able to combine. That's why Shavua is different than Konim. And Rashi explains, Mitoch shechalukos lechatos, mitoch shtei kikaros halalu. Since these two loaves, chashuvos shtayim le'inyan chatos, it's considered to be like two separate items in terms of a carbon chatos, b'shavua zu, with this particular oath. Imamar shavua shalo ochel mizu umizu. Let's say a person says a shavua he's not going to eat from this and this. V'yachal kazayis mizu, or kazayis mizu behelam echad. Let's say he eats a kazayis from this one and a kazayis from the other one, all in one lapse of awareness. Chayiv shtayim. Actually, the halacha is that he actually is chayiv too. Kedetanan shavua shalo ochel pas chitin, pas saorin, pas kusmin, v'yachal chayiv al kolachas v'yachas. We see it says in the Mishnah that this is true. If it says a Shavuot, he's not going to eat paschitin, pasorin, paskusman. He eats from each one. He's going to be chayiv. Umaisina la b'toras kohanim. This is brought in Toras Kohanim. Mivahoya ki yesham laachas me'ela lachayiv kolachas v'yachas. We learn it from a pasuk. V'chiyamar nami mizu shtei shavuos chashivi. And so the same thing when he says mizu. Again, let's say that's the language he uses by Shavuot. It's considered two Shavuos. Hilkach kiyachal mizu chatzi shir. Therefore, if he eats from this one the half of the shir, umizu chatzi shir, and from this one half of the shir, ein mitzdarfos, they're not mitzdarif. Because of that halacha that applies by carbon chatos, we apply that by Shavuot as well. Aval konamos, but when it comes to konamos, ein chalukos la'ashamos, they're not divided for the asham laman damar yesh me'ila bekonamos, according to the one who says that there is me'ila by konim. Dim nene v'chazr v'nene behelam echad. If he were to get benefit and then get benefit again, all in one lapse of awareness, chadahu demechayiv, he's only chayiv one. Tekulu chada me'ila, it's all considered one me'ila. And Rashi continues, kedetanan, as we learned in the Mishnah, tziref hasamila lizman meruba. Again, the Mishnah says this very same idea that it's all considered to be one me'ila. And Rashi notes, vim b'shnei helamas. Now let's say there's two lapses of awareness, afilu mechad minayonami. So then even if it was two lapses of awareness, even from one loaf, you're going to be obligated to. And Rashi continues, v'chein linyan malchus, and this is true also when it comes to malchus. In bahasra achas chadahu delak. If there's one warning, you get one malchus. Vim b'shnei hasros, and if there's two warnings, afilu mechad minayu, even if it's from one of them, sharei over v'chozer v'over, because that's considered a transgression. And then a second transgression, Kedetanan, like we learned in the Mishnah, Nazir shayashosa yayin kolayom kulo. It says if a Nazir is drinking wine all day, eno chayiv alachas, only chayiv one. Amrlo al tishta. If they say to him, don't drink. V'ushosa, and then he drinks chayiv al kolachas v'yachas. He's chayiv on each one. And so Rashi's point over here is that in terms of two helamos, if there's two separate lapses of awareness, then it's obvious that you're going to be chayiv too. That's not the discussion over here. The discussion over here is when it's helam echad. So there we make a distinction between Shavuos and konamos. When it comes to Shavuos, behelam echad, we're actually going to say chalukos lechatos. You're going to bring separate karbonos. That is not true when it comes to konim. And the Gemara continues, Zihachi, if so, again, if you're going to say that the distinction between Shavuos and Konamos is that by Shavuos it's Chalukos Lechatos, and you don't have that by Konamos, and in both cases, the Brisa is talking about a situation where you use the word Achila. So if that's the case, Rabbi Meir Omer Konamos Keshvuos. So now we have to look at Rabbi Meir's opinion in that Brisa. Again, Rabbi Meir said that Konamos are the same as Shavuos, and the presumption over here is that what we're saying is just like by Shavuos, we say they don't combine, so too by Konamos they don't combine. So what does that mean? Bishlama Shavuos hol v'chalukos lechatos. I understand by Shavuos, like Rav Pinchas just said, since there's a division made in terms of carbon chatos, so we also say in mitzdarf, and we also say that they do not combine. However, ela konamos, but when it comes to konamos, amaylo, so why shouldn't they combine? Now we can't understand Rabbi Meir. Once you're bringing in Rav Pinchas and saying that the whole reason why Shavuos we say in mitzdarfos is because chalukos lechatos, then we cannot understand why Rabbi Meir would say that konamos should be treated in the same fashion. And so the Gemara answer to that, Epoch, we have to reverse it. Rabbi Meir Omer Shevuos kikonamos. What Rabbi Meir is actually saying is in the other direction. He's saying that Shevuos are like konamos, meaning just like konamos, you are able to combine. By Shevuos also, you are able to combine. And the point is, Veles le'le de Rav Pinchas. And according to this answer, Rabbi Meir would not hold of what Rav Pinchas' svara. Rav Pinchas said again that by Shavuos, since it's chalukos lechatos, that's why it's in mitzdarfos. And Rabbi Meir says there's no such svara. You can't simply say that because it's chalukos lechatos, therefore it's not mitzdarfos. Rather, again, Shavuos are like konamos, and they in fact are mitzdarif. And the Gemara continues, Ravina says, Kiko Amar Rav Papa Inyan Malchus. When Rav Papa said, again, this whole question was on Rav Papa, because Rav Papa had said that konamos, there's a violation even b'cholshu. And here we have a brisa that's talking about the fact that by konamos, is it mitzdarif, is it not mitzdarif? That implies that there is a minimum shear of kazayas. And so the Gemara is now answering, when Rav Papa said kolshu by konamos, he was talking about malchus. Kitanya hi, but the brisa, what's that talking about? Le'inyan carbon, that's talking about carbon. Debo'inon shava pruta, because there happens to be a minimum shear. By carbon, there's a minimum shear of a shava pruta, and so therefore, again, that would be different. When it comes to malchus, there's no minimum shear, but when it comes to bringing a carbon where you need a shava pruta, there's a minimum shear. Then we can start talking about mitzdarfos or not. And Rashi explains, Ki Amar Rav Papa bekonamos kolshu, when Rav Papa said by konamos any amount, that's lamalkus kamer, that's for malchus. V'chitanya hidem mitzdarfen, when we say in the brayso about combining, le'inyan carbon me'ila, that's talking about a carbon me'ila. Again, this is following the understanding that there's a carbon me'ila by konamos. V'tzirif the katani lav lekazayis, and the combining that we're talking about is not combining to the shear of a kazayis, ela l'shava pruta, rather that it's combining to be worth a pruta. And the Gemara continues, Lamemer, does this mean to say, the savri rabbanan yesh me'ila bekonamos, that the Rabbanan hold there is Me'ila by Konamos, because again, that's the assumption we just made, that we're talking about a carbon Me'ila by Konamos in terms of whether mitzdaref or not. V'atanya, but we learned in a brayso, Kikor zu hektish. Let's say a person says, this loaf is hektish, v'achla, and then he eats it, bein chaveiro mal, whether he eats it, whether his friend eats it, that's Me'ila, that's a misuse of something that is hektish. Lafikach yesh lapidyon, and therefore, there is redemption. But Kikor zu olai hektish, let's say the way he phrases it is that this loaf is to me hektish, which is essentially konamos. So then humal chavero lo mal, he commits meila, but not his friend. It's only prohibited to him. Lafigach ein lapidyon, therefore there is no redemption. Divrei Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Rashi explains, v'yesh lapidyon, again by a classic case of hektish, there's redemption. Shetofesas pidyon v'hiyotz l'chulin. Again, you'll be able to redeem it with something, and the kedusha will go on to what you used to redeem it, and it's going to become chulin. Because by hektish it's written that you can redeem. But again, by a situation which is kikor zu olai hektish, effectively konamos, so ein lapidyon, so then there is no redemption lahatirulo. He can't redeem it to make it mutter to him. Shalom nemar pidyon b'isurin. We don't say a concept of redemption when it comes to isurin, to prohibitions. That is something, again, unique to hektish, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Beis Amud Beis.